All right, so it looks like we are currently live, everybody. So welcome, welcome. Welcome to the Nursing Leadership Network. I am your host, Noelle Coles, and I'm thrilled about today's show today. I am going to introduce three brilliant leaders in our nursing career, in our nursing field, that will talk to you and really walk through a day in a life of what a nursing leader looks like and beyond, and what are they doing now. So without further ado, I'm going to allow our fearless leaders to introduce themselves, and we'll go ahead and get started. So I'll go ahead and get started with you, Carrie.
Hi, nice to be here. So I am Carrie Bear. I live in the state of Oklahoma. Have been a nurse for 25 years, started my profession in the ICU and took kind of an untraditional route to be a CNO. I was in safety and quality space, spent 3 years of my career serving in the United States Navy, which was a really cool experience. And just as doors opened, I walked through them with some grace and prayer, and ultimately served as the system CNE for our health system.
Very nice. Patches.
Hi, thanks. Glad to be here. Noelle, thank you for pulling this group together. So fun to be part of this. So a little bit of background. Whenever I was in clinical practice, much like Carrie, I was in critical care and mostly neurotrauma. Really loved the concept of a community hospital and serving the most poor and vulnerable. And so served a mission with the Ascension Health Ministry for 19 years. And through that history, got to do many different roles, traditional nursing leadership roles, clinical operations, to bed management and patient logistics, to implementations of EHRs when that was happening at its full speed. So lots of work in clinical informatics and technical teams. Then transitioned, I would say, more to our virtual environments and how we build clinical surveillance programs and virtual nursing programs. And so really every 2 or 3 years, when we talk about career, I was given an opportunity to do something new, interesting, innovative, disruptive. And I kind of held on with both hands. I didn't know exactly what that meant some of that time, but through some great mentorship, through support, through my own knowledge acquisition, I was able to make those roles over time. Whenever I departed from Ascension, I began working on the healthcare services side of the industry, a great learning experience where I was exposed to sales and how a sales team works, how mergers and acquisitions work, and how we think about, kind of cross-connecting on the plan side of the industry, healthcare services, the provider side of the industry, and how those can lock hands on behalf of patients or health plan members. So really got to do some interesting work with an organization on the healthcare services side. And at this point in my career, I'm writing a new chapter. And you're looking at potential for private, I call it private practice, but really consulting services, supporting other leaders, supporting mentoring other nursing and clinical leaders through their journeys as well. So being part of this podcast is really close to my heart.
Great. Thank you so much. That's great. Corinne, how about you?
Good afternoon, everybody. So excited to be here. I am obviously the senior member of the group, looking at 43 years in the nursing profession. Amazing, amazing career trajectory. I've done so many incredible things and met so many wonderful people. Patches will have an offline conversation about mentoring because my DMP work was on mentorship. So very hot topic for me. In terms of my clinical background, pediatrics and rehabilitation nursing have been my two areas of clinical specialty and still are. I was in pediatric rehab for about 17 years, had started there as a new grad in an era when they didn't hire new graduate nurses into pediatrics. You had to go for your typical 2 years of med surg, which I clearly had no interest in doing. I got hired in this pediatric facility and worked my way up through nursing leadership in that very small pediatric rehab facility in New Jersey. And at one point, I remember my medical director, who I loved and respected so much, saying to me, "What else are you going to do with your career?" And I looked at him and I was so appalled. I said, do you want me to leave here? I love it. He said, how do you know you love it? You've never done anything else. Well, I didn't like that he said that to me, but in retrospect, that was really very good advice because he did get me off my laurels and I proceeded to pursue other avenues, moved to Florida and have really had a great career trajectory since then, in mostly leadership positions. I found my way back to rehab. I'm sort of like a homing pigeon with rehabilitation. It's just sort of in my blood and something that's meant to be. But I had the great gift of multiple mentors throughout the course of my career that I still stay in touch with, even to this day, 40 years later, that really molded and made impact on me as a young nurse and really helped fortify the belief systems and the mores that I was developing as a young practitioner. Once I got my hands and feet into leadership, it absolutely was a love for me. Being able to provide care for those who provide care was really a labor of love for me and has been ever since, up until the point I retired on April the 1st of 2023 from hospital operations nursing, and now have proceeded down the path of teaching and learning how to function in academia, which is a little bit different, but a lot the same. I'm learning as the days go by, and just having the great gift of being able to now teach and mentor future nurse leaders that we really and truly need in our profession. And I know we're going to talk more about that today because they are a dying breed, and we need nurse leaders to take care of our nurses. So I really feel like I've had great privilege, and I continue to have opportunities such as the one that we have here today to be able to speak and reinforce and support nursing as a practice. So thanks for having me, and I'm very excited to be here.
And thank you all so much. My goodness, if you look at the years of experience that everyone has had here thus far, just in your introductory, you think about what nurses can do. Each one of you came with different backgrounds and how you got to where you're at. And there's one common denominator I heard, and that is having a mentor. And it's something that I also hold near and dear to my heart. And I was originally going to start this conversation off differently, but I feel that looking at where we're at now in our nursing careers, looking at those new grad nurses coming in, looking at nurse managers where they're at, those of us that have been in this for decades and on, there's always somebody that we've reached out to further evaluate and assess ourselves to help us push us along. And I often encourage that with new nurses as well. You got to find somebody to mentor. And I want to kind of pivot this a little bit in that direction and talk to you guys, to share with the audience that's out there today. And also those of you that have logged in, please chime in and let us know who you are and where you're calling in from, because we'll see that. And I would love for you guys to participate in the discussion as well, because we're really doing this for all of you while we're here having the conversation. We're in it together. It takes a village, and there is a village of us. And let's go ahead and get started with mentoring. Why is mentoring important in the nursing role and as we progress on into leadership? Corinne, I'll start with you since you just segued out of that conversation. Talk to me a little bit about the importance of mentorship, what it meant to you, and what we can offer to those that are listening.
Sure. Well, first, I want to make a clear distinction, that there's a difference between precepting and mentoring. And oftentimes the two are used interchangeably. And that's a problem for us in nursing. And building a case for why mentorship is important and why programs are important, formal mentorship programs in the field of nursing. If you look at our professional colleagues, physicians, in a physician's world, they are a medical student, they are an intern and a resident, working close with a clinical mentor. So they're out there practicing medicine before they're actually a physician. With a nurse, they step out of nursing school and into the role of the nurse. There's no transition period. They have an orientation, but the orientation is with a preceptor. It's very short-lived. It's got a checklist, and it's got designed objectives for what they need to accomplish. And those are really to-do things. Those are not development of behaviors or skills or competencies or evolvement in the profession. And so we oftentimes miss the boat with nursing on this. And a lot of times our preceptors are trying to mentor while they're precepting. You can't do both at the same time. You have to teach somebody how to do their job and then how to evolve as a professional. Two different roads. And you see very, very frustrated and burnt out preceptors as a result of this because they can't get it all done. And what ends up happening is the new nurse learns how to do the skill pieces in their orientation from their preceptor, but they don't learn how to be a professional nurse and what that looks like. And your evolution as a professional is through your whole career trajectory. It doesn't make a difference where you're at. So you should always be mentoring somebody, and you should always be being mentored by someone. And I actually do a presentation on this. It's a one CEU presentation where I'm encouraging nurse leaders to develop terminology and a 3-minute elevator speech to build a case for developing a mentorship program in their organizations. This costs money. It's not community service that we're talking about here. And if you're going to ask people to mentor on a formal basis, oftentimes mentorship occurs informally. And that's why it kind of has this start-stop type of a trajectory. In a formal mentorship relationship, there's almost a verbal contractual agreement between mentor and mentee, and that person can kind of move that individual through the steps of their career, but it never goes away. It evolves over time. So very, very important that something is formalized. And I encourage nurses to ask for mentorship. You've got to knock on the door and ask somebody to mentor you, so that you've got that formalized agreement between mentor and mentee.
And I think that's a great point that you bring up too, is the ask, because I feel that could also become very intimidating, especially right out of nursing school. How do you find the ask? How do you figure that out, and when to ask and how to ask? Patches, what about you? What would you say to that if there's a new nurse or a nursing leader out there that is trying to find their way, and they want a mentor, but they just don't know how to ask? What would you say to that?
I think I like what Corinne said about formality versus informality. I think if you stop for a moment and ask yourself the question, just stop and say, am I currently mentoring somebody, or who are my mentors? I don't even think we have active enough thinking about it before we even say the words, right? But who am I mentoring right now? Who is texting me from time to time, asking me questions? Who always approaches me at events or connects with me in some way? That person is maybe organically seeking to be mentored by me. Or, man, every time I'm in this environment, I'll always gravitate to these particular leaders. Why do I do that? That's because I want to be mentored by that. So sometimes you have to just be aware of your own thinking and feeling, and then parlay that into the question, would you mind being a mentor for me? I also think, or saying to someone, would you like for me to help you mentor in this particular area? Another thing that I think is important about mentoring is knowing what you're being mentored about. Yes. Like if I am interested in academia, an area I have no experience, Corinne has a great deal of experience there. I'm going to talk to Corinne about that topic. If I'm looking to be mentored about, how I manage salary and comp, and how I negotiate salary and comp, or severance, or some type of business transaction with my organization, I'm probably going to look to someone who's had a career trajectory that has advancement. That kind of mentoring looks different. We're usually not like the Walmart of mentors, right? We don't know everything about everything. We don't have everything in our toolkit. But what is your secret sauce that you could support and mentor someone with? And how would you define that for yourself? And then what are you intentionally seeking in others, and what is their secret sauce, so to speak? And that way you can kind of carry through your career a variety of mentors. I love my nursing colleagues who are mentors, but I've had a lot of mentorship from my tech colleagues, my business and finance. Business and finance, right? Lots of mentorship through those areas. So I think that's an important reflection for a leader to take, is how and what would I like to be mentored on? Who do I admire who's already doing that? Is there a niche skill set or experience that I could access from that person? and really just do a lot of reflection about that, and then go in with your ask, right? Then
Yes.
kind of know what your ask is whenever you approach folks.
And I think the admiration of a mentor is so important, because if you're looking to aspire more, whether it's in your career or beyond, it's so important to find somebody that feels that with you and that can get you to that level. Carrie, what's your experience been with mentorship, and what advice do you have for nursing leaders that are listening?
Yeah, I would say I was just kind of jotting down a couple of notes. One thing that I commonly hear is a boss thinking they are the mentor for someone who reports to them. And that's kind of it doesn't work that way. And so just being really cautious and careful if you are the leader thinking you're serving as a mentor for somebody who reports to you. I agree with what Patches was saying about that interdisciplinary approach. And so I would say, as executive nurse leaders, it is critical to look outside of nursing to look for mentors. So if it's finance or the chief operating officer, because we don't always speak the same language. One of the things that I think I learned very quickly getting into nursing leadership is that no one at that table speaks the nursing language, which was a shock to me. Like, what do you mean you don't know what mortality is?
Right.
And so I think that helps create that healthy dialogue and just understanding of where each one is coming from. And then again, back to what Corinne said, it is a bi-directional. You can't just walk up to someone and say, I'm your mentor. It has to be that bi-directional, accepting relationship. It's kind of that dance, and ensuring that the person being mentored and the mentee are, both on the same page there, and expecting that relationship.
Well stated. That was fantastic. I'm going to swing over to those that are in the audience. I just want to say thank you for guys for checking in. We've got Rosina Malaska, who's coming in from Maryland. Hi, Rosina. It's been a long time. Dr. Angela Prestia is here as well. And then I've got Nina, who's chiming in from Miami, and Patches, Jeffrey Gregory, who's been a long-term unofficial mentee, giving you a big shout out. So I just wanted to say thank you guys for listening. And for those that may have just chimed in, please feel free to be a part of the discussion. As often as I can look over and look at your comments, we'll go ahead and get to them. But I think it's really important to include everyone in on the dialogue that we're having. And with that being said, too, looking at everyone here, including myself, we've all been CNOs at some point. Whether we said, I want to be a CNO when I grow up, or we've had the opportunity where the role has just positioned us to be next in line, so to speak. I want to take a look at that and really kind of delve into the details of what a day in a life of a CNO was for you guys. How did you get there? Let's start there, because I feel like if we go beyond that, that could be a longer conversation right now. But let's start with when you became a CNO, what were your feelings going into it, and how did that opportunity come up for you? Carrie, I'll start with you.
Yeah, again, I have a very non-traditional approach to how I became the CNO CNE for my organization. I started as a bedside nurse, neurotrauma as well, Patches. So my heart swelled when you said that, and really had this incredible passion for improving care. And I'm someone who, if there's a problem, I don't want to sit there and say, well, that's just kind of stinks. I guess somebody else will fix it for us. I want to be part of the solution. And just always kind of took those opportunities to stand up and help drive change where it was needed within the organization. And through those paths of safety and quality, I ended up in a role called the Vice President of Value and Transformation, and essentially was supposed to be driving safety and quality for our system, and had some leadership changes within the organization, executive leadership changes. And the CEO at the time kind of tapped my shoulder and he's like, hey, we need a nurse executive. We need nursing leadership at the table. It's like, would you do it? And so it was a very interesting, no application type process. And it was scary. It was terrifying. And I thought, yeah, why wouldn't I try that? So jumped in there, and within about a year, we had our global pandemic. And so I mentioned my service previously within the United States Navy, and I think that positioned me to be able to serve as our system incident commander. So it's just interesting how different roles you take, you may not understand them, but they have a purpose down the road. After the pandemic, we had a leadership change at our flagship hospital, and I was asked to serve in dual capacities as the interim chief nursing officer as well as assistant chief nurse executive, which I would say was one of the most challenging. Not only is post-pandemic nursing leadership challenging, serving in those dual capacities, trying to be the voice of nursing for our system while also leading the largest hospital within our system that had maybe some biases that could be portrayed there, trying to help get them back on foot. So very challenging. And as others mentioned earlier, recently there's been an organization change, and now I am, my role was eliminated. The CNE and the CMO role were combined to be the chief clinical officer. And so now I'm kind of in this transition, and it's been incredible to meet people such as you guys on this call, to see like all the incredible things that are happening outside of nursing operations. So it's been a interesting path, and I know that it's going to be a great next chapter.
Yeah, I agree to that too, because it's a little overwhelming, and I think it becomes intimidating after being in a position, and especially with an organization for so long. I remember having those feelings of, oh, where do I go now? It's almost like you're treading in dark waters, and then you start to slowly feel isolated until all of a sudden you discover there's so many of us. And this is one of my joys of bringing a lot of leaders together through having a podcast, because we are all not in a unique position. And I think it's so important for so many that are listening out there to see that you could love what you do, and you can love where you can go too. And unfortunately, it just, healthcare is where it's at, and positions will get eliminated. But what I love to hear from the three of you is the experience and the knowledge that you have all gained, and to really take a self-reflect back within and say, my gosh, I have done a lot. I'm proud of who I am. I can do this. I can go somewhere else. I can go into education. I can, the world is your oyster. And I'll segue that into you, Corinne, because you've had a fantastic and very long career that you explained. I've also been a PICU nurse. That was my trade at the time. I was born and raised a PICU nurse, congenital heart. So I knew from a pediatric standpoint, and then going into leadership. But I've heard so many leaders position themselves now going into education. And I want to hear a little bit about a day in a life of you, from where you were as a nurse executive, and then how did you get into education?
Great question. First, Carrie, I want to thank you for serving. I didn't hear your comment before that you're in the Navy, so I'm a Marine mom, very, very proud, and
Thank you.
Respect that ability to be able to go into the service. Not something I could do. I could be a family member, but I couldn't do it myself.
And you also make fantastic leaders in healthcare. There's so many.
Absolutely. But in terms of, looking at how do you go from one place to the other, I think, as Carrie mentioned, I was the, kind of the can-do kid on the nursing leadership team, would raise my hand, jump in, volunteer. If there was a department that was without a manager, when I was a nurse manager, they put me in OB. I'd try to be the OB manager, and you can gravitate and you can acclimate into these roles if you know how to talk with people. I've been labeled a bridge builder in two of the organizations that I've worked for, and I know I have a very strong propensity to be able to put people in a room together and get them working in the same direction. It comes from being part of a dysfunctional family, I'm not sure, but I was also fortunate enough to have a few senior nurse leaders in the organization I was in that saw some things in me and propelled me forward. They challenged me to do more. And so in the organization I worked for down in West Palm Beach, it was a 450 bed level 2 trauma center. I started out as the rehab manager. They threw me over into the pediatric area. I was the director of pediatrics. I was the interim for OB for a period of time. So I was kind of all over the place. And I think when it was observed that I had that versatility, there was opportunity there. An associate chief nursing officer position was created, and my CNO basically announced to me, "You're taking this job." And so I trusted her and, went along with it. And it gave me such an opportunity. She was a just do it type of person. I don't know how many pairs of Nikes she had in her closet, but she would say, just do it. And she came to me one day and said, Corinne, we need to be a comprehensive stroke center, and you're going to create it. I had not the nearest clue what I was doing, even where to start. But those types of experiences helped me to build a bucket of skills and understand how to leverage relationships. And I can't say enough about leveraging relationships in organizations, whether it's up, down, sideways, no matter how you go, it's all about relationships. And for somebody who's going to be in the CNO role, pretty much everything is going to cross your desk. If it's a quality issue, it's coming to you. If it's a service issue, it's coming to you. If there's a conflict issue, it's coming to you. So you get pretty adept pretty quickly at being able to manage these things, and even you get pretty good at them. But I think that the biggest piece of it is really understanding where you are in the organizational chart. And I view my leadership a little bit differently than most leaders. And in fact, I had a CNO tell me I would never be a CNO with this philosophy. My philosophy is to lead from behind. My leadership vision is a picture of a shepherd. And the reason for that is the shepherd can kind of go with their arms out. If anybody's, I'm not going to be religious here, but Jesus Christ was a shepherd and you heard the sheep. My greatest fear as a leader was, because this CNO that told me I would never be a chief nursing officer with that philosophy, she said, you have to be out in front leading the charge. And I said, but what if I turn around and no one's behind me? At least if I'm behind them, I can see who's falling. I can see who's doing well. I can lift up where there needs to be, a little bit more help and support. To the point that Carrie made earlier, in terms of your mentorship, your boss cannot be your mentor. No. They cannot. It gets things too mixed up. You've got to have that mentorship aspect of your career development along your trajectory. So I was able to develop those opportunities that presented themselves, but I think because I was the can-do kid, they would allow me to try it on for size, and I was willing to work hard. One thing I would say to those who are interested in these types of positions, 24/7 means 24/7. And I've had feedback from other members of my C-suites to say you're too accessible to your staff, or you allow too much accessibility. I only knew one way to do it, and that was they had 24/7 accessibility. So if a CNA needed to call me at 3:00 in the morning, I felt that they had the right to have my contact information to be able to do that. So the availability, the constant, you're on 24/7. Things that are going to go wrong are not going to happen between 8 and 4 Monday through Friday.
Right.
They're going to happen on weekends. They're going to happen on the holidays. Throw the pandemic into it, the nursing shortage, all of these things. You get the great privilege. To me, these jobs are a gift and a privilege, but we choose them. So you have to go into the role with the conscious understanding that I'm making this choice, and the title and the name on the door and the lab coat, those are all great things, but they really pale very, very quickly. Where the rubber meets the road is your ability to be able to continuously sustain and be the voice of the patient, and then ultimately your staff. That's your job in a nutshell. And you've got to be the one that's out there beating the drum, continuously beating the drum. And I learned how to do it in a very professional and eloquent way, and I would beat the drum nonetheless. My administrators, I was somebody they loved to hate because they couldn't get angry at me because I was so nice, but I didn't stop beating the drum.
It's true. It's like the saying, don't mistake my kindness for weakness,
Correct.
Patches.
Yeah. So I once had, I don't think this was a nurse leader that shared this with me, but the concept of, what you put in, there should be a yield. This is value informed nursing at its best. And so I would put in, much like you described, Corinne, all of the extra, and I wasn't conscious of it perhaps, but, well, let me ask one more question about that, or let me figure out this one other thing. Oh, well, let me anticipate this problem. So let me go ahead and start working on that. And I think those skills of anticipation that nursing kind of naturally has and gets honed over time. And if you approach your work that way, that gets recognized. And so for me, every few years inside one organization, this could happen, and through other organizations as well. If you change organizations, that's just my career trajectory. So every 2 to 3 years, that doing something extra or taking a little bit of interest in something outside of my existing role parlayed itself into my next role. And fortunately, along that way came a pay increase and often an increase in salary. I think that's something that's important for nurse leaders to look at as well. We can be the kings and queens of make do. And often you have to set boundaries for yourself for what is going to be okay in your career. And am I still developing? Is what I'm being given the kind of development pathway that I want to take? But in those roles, every 2 or 3 years on my way to a more senior nursing executive role was the ability to do something a little bit new, but yet the same kind of secret sauce, and I keep using the term secret sauce, the same kind of skill set that I was using in one role, I would begin to use in the new role, even though it would be new content or a new work area or a new set of responsibilities or a new team, whatever that would be. And at some point when I was taking a very traditional nursing leadership path, nursing manager, nursing director, CNO, and somebody said, how about informatics? And I took what felt like a hard right into the technical side of the industry. I began to get anxious, right? I had only seen one trajectory for a nurse executive. And I began to get nervous, and I ran into this great book called Pivot. And it was basically described, you have one, like a basketball player, which I was never very good at. I'll just say that. There's one leg you kind of use to stand, and you pivot with the other leg and point the other leg in the direction maybe that you want to go with the ball. But your pivot leg stays solidly connected to the ground and helps you form whatever next direction you're going. That visual stuck with me. And so I began to reflect on what is my pivot leg? What is the toolkit that I have that makes me uniquely me as a leader, that I can point to just about any role, to just about any team, to just about any program. And I needed to believe in myself going into that clinical informatics role. And I got my hands on that book and began to reflect on what is that pivot leg. So I would say, as you're thinking about your career and trajectory advancing to a senior nursing leader role, think about what is that skill set that is uniquely you. Your experience will change, but there's some tool sets that are uniquely yours that you bring to just about every role, and you wash, rinse, and repeat those. And that usually will bring you success. And so for me, on my trajectory, it changed every 2 or 3 years, and I had a wild variety of different opportunities that I got to take advantage of before my most senior executive nursing leadership role. And but there were a set of tools that I use in every single role. And whenever I start to get anxious or concerned about my success in that next role, or so that imposter syndrome tries to sneak in there on you, I remember this is my pivot leg. These are the things that make me uniquely me in this leadership role, to guide this team or to lead from behind, as Corinne described. I'm going to lead with some of those same things. And then through active listening, through all this great content, Noelle, I've maybe lost the gist of the question, but the truth, but just
you did not. Keep going. These pearls of wisdom are just everyone between the four of us or the three of us, and then those online are just absorbing it all in. So keep going. This is beautiful.
I just want to make sure I'm staying on target.
You are.
But truthfully, think about what your pivot leg is.
Yes.
And don't be afraid to explore different pathways to that CNO role or to that senior nursing executive role, or as we're seeing defined in the industry, that chief clinical executive, that senior clinical executive, because all along the way, you have interacted with far more than nurses. You understand over time, medical practice, PTs, RTs, OTs, all of the teams that are around nursing. You begin to understand those approaches as well. So, don't just, I would say, limit yourself to the possibility of the CNO role. Think about roles even beyond that represent all clinicians. There are a lot of similar struggles across the whole clinician set, and you could represent those with humility, obviously, but you can represent those and use that pivot leg. Think about your pivot leg.
And I love that. That analogy, and just thinking about that. I've not read that book yet, and I'm definitely going to read it and post it afterwards on the link so everyone that's listening can look for it too. But when you think about the pivot leg, I feel that nursing often gets in this state of paralysis of this is what I do, and this is the only place that I can go. And I'm going to go back to the comments. Angela had mentioned creating connections with members of the executive team, and more importantly, with the staff you serve is critical to preserving patient outcomes and a healthy care environment for your staff. So well said to Corinne there. And then currently, Rosina chimed in with great feedback off of your last comment patches, and talking about the accessibility of an educator. Not everyone believes in doing this, practicing this way, but she said that nursing is not a 9-to-5 job, which we all know. And when those are helping to succeed their job, then they know that we have their backs and that we're there. We're just a phone call away as well. And, I think taking those comments into consideration and really listening to what everyone is saying too brings me into the next part of the discussion, and really talking about those that are aspiring to be CNOs. What does that world look like? And I'll tell you, in the last year since I've pivoted my role, I've seen a role of a CNO morph into so many different fields. It's not just that traditional, you work in a hospital, you're the assistant nurse manager, executive director, CNO, but there are the chief nursing informatics. There's the chief nursing. There's so many, the educator, that you can make one up because it's okay, because the world as we know it is continuing to evolve and it exists. So I want to hear more from the three of you. What advice do we have for those aspiring to further and advance their career in nursing leadership, specifically going into the role of a CNO? What advice do you guys have for advice for the aspiring CNOs? Carrie, I'll go ahead and start with you.
Yeah, thank you. And I love, Patches, what you just said about the pivot foot. And I made a note of that because it's so true. And it almost kind of segues into your question, Noelle. One of the things that I was beginning to see with some of our leaders was it was more about the position versus what their current role was. And so I say, give everything you have into what your assignment currently is. Take on those extra opportunities every 2 to 3 years, as Pat mentioned. But make your space incredible and great. And people see that. And they pick you up and they see your leadership. They see how you behave in certain situations. But if you're just trying to be, visible or going to go through the politics, that is personally for me, that's always a turnoff to me. I want to see how you are functioning and in the work that you are asked to do. be it management, be it as an educator, your willingness to take on different projects, but just make your space incredible and great, and you will be recognized.
Love it. How about you, Corinne?
Well, the first thing I would say is that your to-do list is never going to be finished. And the day is never going to look like you think it's going to when you're driving into work. Never. You have to really have good self-reflection. Your inside has to match your outside. You're on all the time. And for some people, that's an issue. And you have to really examine, how does that feel to be on all the time? When you're walking in the cafeteria to get your salad, you're on. And so you have to be able to be giving of yourself consistently. So there is that draw on your resources, on your physical, your emotional, and your psychological resources. And I would say examine where you are in your personal life with regards to this, because this is a role that takes away a lot of your personal life. And you can try to put boundaries and, shut your phone off or, do all of those. There's 1,000 books out there on how to try to preserve that. But the reality is, at the end of the day, when the crisis hits, you're really where the buck stops. And so going back to what I was saying before, the name on the door and the name on the lab coat, that fades very, very quickly in the light of, there's 3 ACA representatives in the lobby of the hospital on Christmas Eve. That's just how it is. And so you kind of have to be ready to have that flexibility. But I would also say to take a look at what that's going to do to family members. And not that folks with small children can't take these jobs. I'm not saying that. But it is a lot to try to spread yourself in many, many different places. So to understand something's got to give. So whether you would hire help in the home, for example, myself, I brought my mother to Florida and she moved in with us and we built a home that had a room for her, and she took care of my kids in the afternoons, because you don't come home for after school activities when you're in these roles in most situations, maybe 1 time out of 10. So really having a good understanding of what the role calls for. If you can have the opportunity to shadow somebody who's existing in a role like that, to kind of have an understanding, goes back to that mentorship principle, to talk to people who have done it. What was the greatest part of it? What was the most difficult or challenging part of it? So you really have a good idea of what you're getting yourself into in terms of the role expectations. And then organizationally, there's a whole slew of relationships that you have to drive. Somebody mentioned, developing relationships. I think Angela mentioned it in a post about developing relationships with other members of the executive team. That's a make or break you as a CNO. I mean, you've got to have those relationships, and you have to work on those relationships. And those folks think differently because they come from different backgrounds than we do in nursing. So you kind of have to walk a mile in their shoes a little bit to be able to understand the way that they think. And, in order to be able to turn your CFNO into a CFO, you have to with the language that he speaks or she. And that's critical to the success for your team. So really understanding what the expectation is going to be. It is lonely at the top, and you're either going to love it or you won't. But the reality is, like we've been talking about, you still can pivot. If you get into it and you say, well, this isn't what I thought it was going to be, you still have great opportunities, and you're getting those experiences and filling that skills bucket every single day that you do the job. But I would also say, take a look at what gives you joy. What are the things that give you joy? And if those things are entailed in what that job calls for, that role calls for, you stand a fighting chance. If you're not going to get any joy from this job, I would say it's something you need to reconsider, even if you thought it was a goal, because you've got to find ways to be able to get that joy.
Yeah, and well said. And I think that's the one thing that we don't do really well as nurses going into leadership, is that we're not kind enough to ourselves to know that it's okay to try a new position out, and it's okay to figure out that this is not the position for me. You don't know until you try it out. But taking back that self-reflection piece of that is very, very important. Carrie, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to tag on to what Corinne said about it's very lonely at the top.
Yes.
That is a critical aspect of decision making at the executive level, you have to be a united front and have integrity, and the way that you deliver that messaging, you are no longer one of the directors, the managers, the frontline caregivers. You are setting the vision, you are inspiring, you are encouraging, and you are, leading the largest workforce in a system forward with sometimes right now very challenging task of the executive team, but you cannot let that be shown whatsoever. So it is very lonely, and having that partnership with the executive team, that mentorship, critical, especially this day and age.
Thank you for that. Patrice, what advice do you have?
I'm going to swing exactly the direction that Carrie just brought up about loneliness at the top in community, or I'm going to do the inverse of that. What is your new community? And depending on the type of organization that you're in, in my case, for example, coming from a large health system, you could have networked and created community just inside that one organization, and you would have been busy networking all day long. But you really do have to be intentional about creating your community. And this kind of, closes the circle with mentors, mentees, relationships. Find those other CNOs in various systems. Get involved with your AONL colleagues. Really try to connect to other executive leaders like yourself and create your community so that you're getting a vantage point outside of your own organization, outside of your own facility. If you're a more traditional CNO of a hospital, make sure that you're creating your community that you can draw from, both mentally, spiritually, intellectually. Keeping sure that you keep diversity of thought. That's one thing that I would say as you go into your CNO role. That is part of your job. You will feel like that you're not doing your job by doing those things. That's the wrong thinking. It is part of your job to stay current with lots of different vantage points of the industry so that you can be the most effective CNO that you can be. The other thing that I would say along that is that there are maybe some traditional topics that you would develop yourself in to become a CNO, right? Nursing practice, understanding maybe your state's rules and regulations around nursing practice. That more traditional knowledge set, I believe, is changing over time. The demand of a nursing leader's knowledge in data and analytics and value-based care, social determinants of health, the whole continuum of care and how the journey of a patient or member goes through that entire journey. It's not just what's happening maybe in your hospital to that patient in terms of their experience. I think that's a critical knowledge set that maybe has adapted over time. But data analytics, technology, and how the human interface with technology becomes all the more important in the modernized CNO role. I think there are some digital and tech advocacy. You will be spending a great deal of your time in advocacy of nursing and nursing practice. What does advocacy for nursing in the modern era look like? It doesn't look the same as it did, 20 years ago. And so how do we kind of incorporate the new challenges of nursing into the knowledge base that you build as a CNO? And it is your responsibility, just like it was your responsibility at the bedside to keep current on what medications and protocols we use to treat a head injury. It's just as much as a CNO, your responsibility to stay abreast of the industry and current industry knowledge so that you can really care for those team members in the way that you want to with top tier knowledge. So was easy for me to apply as a nurse executive. I would, we're very, very intent on making sure we don't cause any harm at the bedside. We have to have that same intentionality in a C-suite role.
Very well said. Wow. Okay. This was amazing. We've got a few more minutes and I want to touch base now on thinking about our fellow CNO, CNE colleagues who are currently in their roles, who are seasoned and are struggling? Whether that means struggling in their role and they want to stay or they want to go. What does that look like for a CNO now who's struggling? What kind of advice do you guys have for them? Corinne, I'll go ahead and I'll start with you.
Sure. I mean, first, I think, like we've talked about throughout this conversation, there has to be a safe space provided to begin the discussion, because you have to call it what it is. And if you're having difficulty, and a lot of times, and in one of my CNO roles, as I had 3 of them, I was in an organization where I was not a fit. And I don't know if to this day, I don't know if it was me or my CEO. It was not a gel. I couldn't work harder. Nothing I could do could get me to where I needed to be. And I knew I was in a bad place and I needed to make a change. The first thing I needed to do was to admit to myself I needed to make the change. And what was I going to do? What was that? I was so worried, was my resume going to look like? Did I fail? And you go through all of these things. I'm going to leave my staff. But I knew from my own mental and psychological well-being, I could not stay in that environment. I kind of took it at the time as a sign that maybe I wasn't going to be somebody who would be in the C-suite. Maybe I wasn't designed to be an executive. Maybe operations was more my forte and less strategy. So I had to take a step back. So first and foremost is really to be able to identify that it's okay to feel this way. And again, going back to that mentorship, if you've got a mentor, that's the person you're going to talk to. That's the person I picked up and called, was my mentor. Here's where I'm at. I don't know what to do. I was really feeling paralyzed, did not know what to do. And she gave me some really good direction. She sent me in a direction for some other people that could be resources for me. And I developed a plan and made a change that ultimately resulted 2 jobs down the road in the job that I retired from, which was the CNO of a twice designated magnet hospital. Go figure. So, you just don't know that something that I think, Patches, you talked about a little bit earlier, making a hard right is maybe somehow going to put you back on a path that you never dreamed of. So really identifying somebody that you can talk to and trying to develop a plan around it. I can't help but think, even based on what we're doing today and how much the virtual world has been leveraged since COVID, it's one of the few silver linings we had with COVID, that there has to be a way to be able to leverage a virtual platform, a mentorship type of an interaction would be available for leaders to have a mentor that's kind of in that space where you can tap into that person and quick get a response from that individual in a rapid way or in an effective way. Because when you talk about needing advice in that type of a crisis situation, person's in a crisis, it's various levels of crisis, but they've got to make a plan for what it is they're going to do. Because if you're feeling that way in your role as a CNO, you're not making good decisions. You can't be worried about who's behind you, because you're not moving forward if you're worried about who's behind you. So it's really a matter of trying to take a look at how you're going to make it safe for nurses, executive nurses, to identify that they're in that place, and where would it be safe for them to have that conversation. And in all likelihood, and you guys can chime in here, I don't think within the organization is the place for the conversation.
Right. I agree.
I wanted to say something about that there. When you're in, and I think crisis sometimes very much is the right word here. Going through something like that creates a little bit of a crisis in identity. Sometimes we get pretty attached to these roles that we become, and especially when we've been on the hustle, to get those roles in our careers, or really trying to move up in organizations, and that can really just trap you into this role, and you have to sustain yourself along that journey. And I call them little cups of water Go outside. You're running a marathon whenever you're dealing with maybe a burnout situation until you transition to the next right step for yourself. Go get those cups of water along those water stops. Go talk to your colleagues outside of the organization. Go talk to maybe vendors that you've been engaged with, or service providers. Connect them with it. What do you love about your work? Can you tell me a little bit more about the strategy and plan for your organization? And sometimes just hearing those stories creates possibility for you. And creates thought outside of your own world that will kind of help you understand the potential for yourself. And it will give you a little bit of energy, right? A little inspiration to kind of keep you going as you're in that role and you're not maybe quite ready to make the transition, or it's not the right time for you. But go out and find your water spots. Go find those relationships that fill your cup. I feel like this sounds very squishy, but it is a tactic that worked for me. And in no time, it parlayed itself. And I say no time. In around 6 months, it parlayed itself into 2 other job opportunities for me as I made transitions away from the organization I was in. So I really, there is that period of time that you're going to have to sustain yourself and go find those water spots, whatever it is that brings you those moments of joy. And it may even inspire thought outside of what you're currently doing.
Wow, I agree. And squishy's okay. If we're not squishy, we're not flexible. We're not.
That's right. My first degree is in psychology. Sometimes I think I use that as much or more than any other.
Right, you have to. Yeah. Oh my goodness, you have to. I feel like it's important to be squishy. So Carrie, we're going to take it home with you in the last remaining minutes left of the show. Why don't you share any advice that you may have for seasoned colleagues of ours who are struggling, that are CNOs right now?
So everything that my colleagues here shared, I think it's also very healthy to have a coach as an executive. Again, if you don't have that mentor, it's just a great space to just talk through, and many times your perception is not actually, like, a coach can really help you kind of walk through the situation and get clarity. I would also say one of the things that's always helped me, just network, attend conferences. And Patches, you mentioned this, but I have incredible colleagues across the country that at any given time, we have a text chain going and we can reach out and, how's your day? Well, the union showed up today, or we're in this negotiation. Like, it's just kind of cool to touch base and check in. And sometimes it's nice to know that you're not alone in some of the issues that you're dealing with. And then Dr. Malaska, I love what you wrote here, when I think we all have to be okay with just accepting that maybe it's an opportunity to move on and look for something different. And that is not failure. I mean, you're in these roles because you're incredibly successful nurse executive, and it is okay to look and pursue something completely different. And there's so many amazing opportunities out there for nursing leaders.
Agreed. Well said. Well, I want to thank all of you, my fellow nurse executive colleagues, for being on the show today. I think this was really powerful to hear coming from everyone, to know that, it's okay whether you're going into this role or you're exiting from this role, that that pivot foot, right, that's the core of this whole discussion today. When we talk about pivoting, that pivot foot is down, as Patches eloquently stated, and that the opportunities are there and they're open. So I want to thank the 3 of you for being on the show today. And for those of you that chimed in later on, the recording will be available for you online to go back to listen to. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you, guys. So fun.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.